Hello and welcome to the Culture Connection Speaker Series. I'm Michael Beckelhimer in Alexandria, Virginia. This program is presented by the American Center of Moscow, which is supported by the American Embassy in Moscow. If you're watching on the American Center's YouTube or VK channels, please post comments and questions at any time. We'll ask and answer them as we go along. So today we're talking with David Sybray, the founder and publisher of West Virginia Explorer magazine. It has been his life's mission to explore and celebrate the state's historical landmarks, cultural heritage, natural beauty. And as this series is about people who follow their passions in cultural affairs and turn them into career opportunities, today we're going to talk about that state, West Virginia, and the influence David's passion for West Virginia has played in his career. So we have a lot to talk about today, a lot to learn. David, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's great to see you. We're old friends from childhood in West Virginia, and it's always good to connect with old friends. Listen, before we get started, since our audience is in Russia, and most of them probably have never been to West Virginia, perhaps don't know much about West Virginia, why don't you set the stage? Tell us briefly, what is West Virginia? What kind of a state is West Virginia? How would you describe it?
West Virginia is a mountainous state. It's not the highest mountains in the United States, but there's a lot of them, and that has influenced everything here. Landscape in any place on the planet usually highly influences a culture and a place, and certainly that's the case here. And it's one of the I grew up in this culture and in this place and among these mountains, and as a child I did not regard them as highly. I just, as many children did, I was more interested in the television world that was being presented to me at that time, and images of the big cities. And it wasn't until I reached university age that I began to reflect on my childhood, growing up in the mountains, hiking in the woods, that I realized what a joy it had been to be here. But so my description of West Virginia might be that it is exceedingly rural, which is interesting in that it is surrounded on all sides by a large population, by flat land, or mostly flat land, in which many of the nation's largest cities are located. Does that help?
Well, that should help. That helps me. You know, it's interesting you make that point. I think one of the things that I think was unique about our time when we were growing up in West Virginia was it was not that we're old, but it was before the internet, and it was before a lot of the roads that now connect West Virginia to other places were built, I think. It felt so far away, you know, because we're really not that far from Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Charlotte, you know, big cities, but it felt so isolated. So I'm wondering, has that changed? Does it still feel like an isolated place, or are people more connected with what's going on outside of West Virginia?
It's much more connected. Those roads, expressways, interstates were being built as we came of age. And it took a while for the established culture here to become more ingrained with the outside world, because they lived a life in which you didn't often travel outside. Now there's a lot of travel going on. I'm only 3 hours, as you know, from Charlotte, 4 hours from Pittsburgh, 4 hours from Columbus, Ohio, these large U.S. cities. And there's a lot more interaction, and people live a lifestyle that's more interactive with those cities. In recent years, with the technological revolution that has allowed people to live away from where they work because they can work online. We've seen a lot more interactivity with the outside world because so many people from the outside world are moving here to get away from the cities. There was a science fiction writer that some may know about, Arthur C. Clarke, who in 1965 had predicted that the civilized world, about 50 years in his future, again, this is 1965, technology would reach the point, communications technology, where almost anyone could live anywhere and work anywhere they liked. And a surgeon in Auckland, New Zealand could perform a surgery in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we've reached that point seemingly. And so people have begun to move to these isolated mountains because they like being here, and they're tending to leave the cities when they can, those high population areas, but they still have access. It's a 3-hour drive to some of these larger auditoriums, music events and venues, larger shopping areas. So right now we're talking in an area about a time in which there's an enormous transformation going on.
Yeah, and I know when I moved to Washington, D.C., I was surprised at how many people I met who go to West Virginia for the weekend or go hiking or have a second home in West Virginia. Because, again, for our audience, the shape of the state is so varied that there are parts of the state that are very close to Washington, parts that are very close to Kentucky and Ohio. So it sort of parts close to Pittsburgh. So depending on where you are in West Virginia, you can have a slightly different experience or be close to different places. But it's an interesting question because I know growing up there, and I know from observing what you've been doing there, and we're going to talk about that, and also my old friends who are still there, who are running businesses and are very active in their communities. There's this sense of how can we keep pushing West Virginia forward, which I haven't noticed in many other states. It's like there's this such a love and a commitment to the place that people want to expand it, bring attention to it, perhaps improve it. Is that what drives you with all of the work that you do with connected to West Virginia? Do you feel a need to make it a bigger kind of place?
I feel a need to adapt certain aspects of life here to the outside world. And what I mean by that is that there, by virtue of being somewhat isolated by this rugged terrain, there are certain things certain things we don't have available. Healthcare is not as accessible as it might be in other areas. Education is not as accessible as it might be. One of the problems with living here had been that there was not a lot of economic development going on. And so people who needed to leave to enjoy doing what their pursuits were in their careers, or just needed the careers and the money, were forced to leave because we didn't have the cities here. We didn't have the offices. We had some good universities, but people would become educated and they'd leave for jobs elsewhere. Over time, West Virginia, and I'll back up here a century, West Virginia had been a rugged wilderness. And then in certain parts of the state, coal was discovered and began to be mined. And there was a lot of coal and there was a lot of mining. But as with any extractive industry, there is a boom and bust cycle. And so hundreds of thousands of people moved here to mine coal. And after several generations, only a few, 2 or 3 or 4 really, left for other financial, greener pastures, other opportunities. And there's a county just to the south of me where I am, a governmental district that is called McDowell County. And its population in 1950 was 100,000 people. And its population now, not 100 years later, is 10,000 people. So there's been an enormous drop that has been caused by the technology of mining. So to bring this back around, my purpose in my career has been largely to try to save the best of this culture, which I find very there's a mystique to it. There's something interesting here. There's something interesting everywhere in the world. It's just I've chosen to make this the place that I wanted to save and enhance and cultivate and educate about.
And so we'll talk about that, the mystique of West Virginia and indeed Appalachian culture. Is this why you studied at West Virginia University? What did you study there?
Appalachian culture. I studied when I first went off to school. I was going into medicine. And at some point within my first year, I realized I was a writer. It's what I wanted to be. And I went home to my family and said, I came out, I said, I'm a writer. And Mom and Dad said they always knew. And so
not many people have the strength to come out as a writer.
Yeah. It's like, this is just the reality of the situation, and you're going to have to deal with it. But the situation at that time was that I realized that I enjoyed the act of providing people information and causing people to feel things. Then I became a journalist. I got a job at a local newspaper, and the objective there, of course, was to report the news of the events going on in society here. But I realized also at that time that my writing became infused not with the creative aspects of telling a story of something that I had invented, perhaps, but telling the story of something that was going on in the real world here. And then I began, it was this mystique, it was this character of West Virginia that began to erupt again in my mission within me, that said, you must bring, instead of reporting on those events and what was going on in local government, it was, you have the opportunity here to teach people about what this culture is and entertain them at the same time. A lot of my stories, even today, 40 years later, 45 years later, it's a lot of it's about entertainment, education through entertainment,
but also uncovering Appalachian culture, West Virginia culture, showing a side of life there that most people wouldn't see.
Yes. And one of the interesting things to me about Appalachian culture is that the Appalachian Mountains, which our state is embedded in, is that a lot of the early language of the first English and Scots, Irish, and Irish settlers here lingered, was steadfast, the way they pronounced things, the sentence structure. And whereas, and it was like that throughout the eastern United States, but because of the terrain, people here retained those sentences and that way of speaking and ideals and interaction with the world around them in the way that the settlers had, whereas outside of this area, in the flatlands among the cities, things were more fluid. And so you had certain pronunciations that became, things moved faster outside the mountains. So even today, I hear commonly speech that is more, you would commonly hear 200 years ago in other places, but here you still hear these words.
It's sort of ironic in a way, I think, that when you think about the stereotypes about West Virginia and the way people might regard the accents, the fact that it actually is more representative of the original way people spoke. It's a very, very interesting and cool thing about West Virginia, that we sort of had that really strong connection to the past.
I think, and I want to add too, that there's one of the reasons that West Virginia is becoming a popular place to visit and live is because there is this authenticity. I feel like a lot of Americans, a lot of citizens of the United States are interested in people who will look you in the eye and will shake your hand vigorously and mean what they say and aren't so invented. And that's, I think, as artificial intelligence becomes more prevalent, people are looking more and more for just other human beings to interact with. And that's one of the things you do get here. There's part of the culture here is not invented in its earnestness. People really do mean what they say, and they're not as there was a policeman, my brother-in-law, who once said of the people in southern West Virginia, where I'm located, where the terrain is more rugged, he said that as a state policeman coming into an emergent situation down here in southern West Virginia, he was better able to gauge what the situation was like because people were more authentic. So in northern West Virginia, there was more sophistication. You could walk into a situation and you wouldn't necessarily quite know the people there. They were better at masking. They were better at inventing them, appearing as others, as appearing as perhaps they weren't. But here, he can tell in with a matter of seconds whether there's going to be a violent situation or whether the people in the residence are going to invite him in for dinner, which is often the way it is. People here are very, very friendly.
That's interesting. I think, my dad was the most Southern West Virginian person I ever knew. And he was like that. You always knew what he thought, and he wasn't afraid to tell you, and he would do anything for you. So then how did you get started with West Virginia Explorer? Because you started your journalism career and then you created this project that now employs other journalists and it has a large online presence. What's the history of that entrepreneurial effort to create a magazine?
I realized that I had been reporting on these kinds of, again, cultural little wonders, nuggets of life and that were popular and were entertaining to people. But then I realized that this thing called the internet, the World Wide Web, would give me the ability to share information more broadly with far more people over the entire earth. And so in about 1996, and the internet had become live here, and maybe it was 1993. But about 1996, I realized its potential, and in 1999, decided to leave the print industry. I had been publishing a magazine called the West Virginia Retirement Times, and its purpose had been to um, draw former residents of the state back after they were finished doing whatever they were doing for their careers and retiring. But I realized at that time, if I went into publishing on the web, that I could reach more people, and I could publish faster, and I wouldn't have to worry about paying unionized pressmen or for the costs of paper and ink. All I would necessarily need was create the forum for the writers, find some people in advertising to be able to bring in the money to support the publication, and then to have an attorney to defend when necessary our freedom of the press, though usually we don't cover too many stories that have anything to do with unveiling any, as the usual press does, unveiling information that might be that isn't all that fun to unveil.
That people don't want unveiled.
Yes.
And so then were you the primary writer on that? Did you bring in other journalists? Like, how did this grow, and what's the state of the Explorer today?
So I started off as the first writer, and I had to find a webmaster, someone who knew the technology that was required to publish information to the web. And I bounced around a few different people at that point, and then luckily found a brilliant partner in this. And but over time, I was required to have to navigate this ever-changing industry. When I started out, there was no Google. There were search engines, but they weren't what they are now. And there were other interrupting developments. Wikipedia. We, at that time, in our infancy, had been more or less kind of a list, a database of sorts, a guide to West Virginia, where you could go in and you could look at all the different state parks or the different historic sites, and we still have that as part of our system. It's within all of this, but among these several thousands of pages we have, we have 380 pages, each one on 380 different towns in this state, each of which I've had the pleasure of visiting in my career. It's been a lot of work, but then. But as the world unfolded on the World Wide Web, and as things became more mobile, as Wikipedia came about and other venues, it was a challenge for us. So we began to, about 15 years ago, become more like a magazine. I realized that people wanted more information. Well, I realized that one thing that we could do that that these other systems couldn't do was present West Virginia by West Virginians. And I began to open up the magazine to more and more writers. Now we're at a point where we get about 500,000 visitors a month to the site, reading information that they've discovered online, that some come directly to our site to look, but often they're Googling around or using search engines to find information and come through to our articles. And that is equivalent to about 2.5 million page views, article reads a month.
That's
so
amazing.
Yeah, we're great, bringing in an enormous number of people. The nice thing is people don't need to know how large we are. They need to just simply know I can find the information I want and enjoy it.
Right. It's pretty cool because it's a resource, but it's also a magazine, as you say. When you were studying Appalachian studies, what were some of the things that surprised you, or that you learned, or that you were most interested in as you were exploring? Because you were still young when you were in college, and you'd grown up here, there. What sort of caught your interest in this field of Appalachian studies?
Well, I might say first that I had no interest when I went into the university in Appalachia or West Virginia. My family was not from here. We were from New York City. My family had settled in the 1600s in New York City, in a place called Flushing in Long Island. And they were a group that was known as the Quakers, who were very tied to the land. I'll bring this conversation out of that. What happened was that about the time that, when I was younger and Mom would bring me in to dinner and I was no longer able to play, I had to sit there and eat dinner. I was mortified by the entire thing. I hated it, just eating, because it took me away from playing. And I thought Mom's meals were the worst. And it was horrible to have to eat them. But about that time at the university where you finally realize, when you start to get hungry, that my mom's food was fantastic. And now I so much wish that she was around to make her meatloaf or pierogies. So now, about that same time, I began to realize that this land that I rejected as backward and undesirable was actually wonderful, and it was a kind of paradise where, again, I can breathe air that no one's breathed before. I'm not in a city anywhere. I'm not around bricks. And I think that it is a far less stressful landscape, I imagine, than I never ended up going off to New York City. I ended up coming back here, and I learned that I feel as if listening to wind and grass is preferable for my constitution, my mental health, my spirit, than listening to ambulances and construction going on. I just think that as a human being, over many tens of thousands of years of development as modern humans that we are, that it might be less stressful to listen to those sounds.
I'm sure it is. Well, in the area in Beckley where you grew up, you were near Piney Gorge. And I know that on your West Virginia Explorer, you are often in this area in the woods, exploring and sort of writing about it. Did you know when you were a kid that this was going to be such a big part of your life?
I had no idea, and yet it was the biggest part of my life. You hit on something here. It was those early experiences, clambering around the hillsides, climbing rocks, swinging on vines in the forests with our friends, and you were among them, that set the stage for all of this. All of that, those early seeds were planted there. And there was a movie that came out called Raiders of the Lost Ark. And here I was able to see this character who lived this fantastic life as a scholar and an adventurer, an explorer, who was exploring what was an exotic for me landscape, desert environments or deep in the jungles. And at some point I realized this land is as exotic as that is. And so it was those early experiences that planted the seeds for all of this. It all starts there.
It all starts there. And it's I love that when you describe yourself, or even when we ask for your biography for this series, you include explorer in the list of things that you are. And I think that's a really bold and interesting way to present yourself. And it's so true. Because from what I see, you are always running around the state, exploring, talking to people, finding new places, explaining what you're learning. How do you decide where to go in West Virginia? What drives you from place to place, and what is that life of an explorer like?
Well, it's often stream of consciousness. It's just I have luckily built a world in which I can, much of the time, do what I wish to do. And luckily, since the requirement principally is for me to be able to take photos of things. Those are things that I usually need to be on site for. Now, often I'll also, of course, hire photographers, actual professional photographers, to do this work, because people need to see things, and people need to see things with other people in them. It was a rule of thumb as journalists early on in photojournalism that you showed not landscapes without people in them or architectural photos of just buildings, but people want to see people doing things. And so often I'm required, or our photographers, I direct them to make sure you get people in the subject doing things. And even today now on the web and with social media, those are the photos that are more that people respond to. What is this person doing? So that is one of the key points is for any particular story I'm going on. It's just the place I happen to be is where I get the interaction in the story. And it's often in an old historical account of something that I'll find the story I want to do, and then I'll research it online, and then I'll go to that place and I'll interact with people there and ask them, well, what do you know? Or did you ever hear the legend of this? And sometimes, and often they would, and sometimes they'll point me in the direction of some older person who remembered that tale. It's not necessarily all the time. Much of the time in my life, I'm doing this. I'm in front of a keyboard on the phone, asking people questions about about this stuff. And as long as I have the photo and the interaction, the communication, then I have that story that I need that I have to publish. But as per how I discover this stuff, it's just, there's all kinds of over 45 years of reading these histories and learning about this land that I'm able to, things will trigger. And another nice thing is by knowing so well where early families settled, for instance, and what those family names are, when I go into any particular area or when I meet someone, I might say, they might tell me that their name is, well, around here where I am now in the mountains, Shrewsbury is a big name. I'm in Wyoming County right now. And so a man might say, well, my name is Shrewsbury. And I'll say, oh, so are you from Barker's Ridge? And he'll say, well, yeah, I'm from Barker's Ridge. How did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
And then a story starts because somebody is communicating information. And as an aside, it's something I tell young journalists coming up, and that's put your notepad away for a little bit. If there's something important, write it down, but have a conversation. We're human beings, for goodness sake. We're community people, and we need to be treated that way, and we respond best that way. In this conversation we're having, it's a conversation. It's a two-way street. And there are other people who are participating in this now. And that's the beauty of the journalism that I, again, insist that our writers engage in. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. And it sounds like a dream job. And also because West Virginia is a relatively small state, it does give you you have the ability to really go and see and do and be in the places that you're that you need to that you're covering. We have a question from Gleb, and this is the best question. And it's perfect for what you were just talking about. So Gleb looked at TripAdvisor, and the two things to do in West Virginia, besides the gorgeous national parks, which we should talk about the gorgeous national parks, because my memories of being in Grandview State Park, it's like that was my childhood. And those caves and the river. Anyway, Gleb wants to know about the lunatic asylum and the state penitentiary, which I think that is such a great question, because I know I get so much stuff about West Virginia on my feed and social media, and every day I get an image of the lunatic asylum or the penitentiary. It's like constant. So Gleb wants to know, what do you think would be a good place to add to the list, given West Virginia's unique culture and authenticity? So what do you know about the prevalence of this lunatic asylum that everyone knows about? And then what else would be on the list?
Well, I'll say that I believe that those two places have become well known in recent years because of dark tourism, because of people's interest in lore and the paranormal, spirituality, ghosts, and chasing after that, again, dark tourism. Both buildings are exceedingly are Gothic, are in the American culture, in the United States culture, are associated with England, and there's a mystique to those, but the architecture of both buildings that makes people just automatically think of things as being the West Virginia penitentiary along our chief state prison had been has castellated towers on it, towers that and again in the Gothic style recall to people the ideas of the Gothic, of the haunted, of hauntings. And so people are attracted to that. People are also attracted to the asylum. Neither of those places actually, to my mind, have very little to do with the authenticity of West Virginia. They are outliers. They are fantastic places to visit. Popularly, there are very interesting places to visit, but and I'll say this of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, it was established because there was at a time when there was a need in America to care for people who could not care for themselves necessarily. But there were many people who were suffering mental anguish, and so the state of Virginia, which we were at the time, decided to create this building and put it deep within the mountains, Trans-Allegheny, which the Alleghenies are a sub-range of the Appalachian Mountains. But it was, in this case, they were putting people as far from the populace, these people with suffering these difficulties as possible. So there is a link there to the situation of the Appalachian, the mountain condition that was located here because of the mountain culture.
That's
That's
an interesting point, an interesting parallel with West Virginia and its the perceived, place within the larger state of Virginia, of which it once was. It's the part out in the mountains and put the people out there.
Yeah, and that would be the cultural relevance in that case. The penitentiary happen to be just a very ornate building, as both of those buildings are. And that's one of the reasons people are so attracted to them. But it doesn't have as much to do with the actual culture of the state. If one wanted to wish to see the culture of the state, I would suggest that they perhaps visit our new national park, which is about 5 years old, which is the New River Gorge National River. That's protected by the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, established by our federal government to protect this canyon that passes through the Appalachian Mountains here. Harper's Ferry, which is at the eastern panhandle of the state, kind of the entrance to the state nearest Washington, D.C., where some of the early seeds of our Civil War were planted as we, as America began to break away from a slave-based economy. It's culturally there. I can't think of all the numbers of places to visit. All of our state parks are wonderful places to experience the beauty of the state and the mountains, the actual biology, the ecology, the environment. And I have to mention Grandview, this place that Michael and I both share these memories about. They're near where we grew up. There was in what is now part of this New River Gorge National Park, there was a beautiful overlook of the canyon. And sometimes when I need to remember why I'm in tourism, I go there, because I have over time made the business of all of this my business. And sometimes when I go back there and I look at this view expanding in front of me, I remember the magic that brought me here.
It really is a magical place. I was in Grandview a few years ago, first time in a long time, and it's been there for a million years. It hasn't changed, and it's just gorgeous. There's another question here. Well, actually, I wanted to go back to the New River Gorge Bridge because, because Gleb had asked, besides the national parks. Well, that implies what else do you do? But the parks really are so important to West Virginia culture and tourism. And when you think about that authentic West Virginia experience, that bridge, the New River Gorge Bridge, right around which we have this New River Gorge Park, the existence of that bridge and the history of that bridge and how so many people watched that bridge get built and how that bridge was, held records, world records, which made West Virginians very proud. It was so high, it was so long. The whole world knew about it. And the fact that it is the most beautiful place to visit. That is a really important part of authentic West Virginia, I think. And I know that even when you drive over that bridge, you think, wow, this is West Virginia. It's a very unifying cultural experience.
On so many levels. One thing I'll say is that when people, when I venture around the state and I talk to people at our travel centers, as you come into the state, I'll regularly ask them, how people are feeling, what their experiences are like as they're measuring them. And one of the questions I asked more recently up near Morgantown, coming into the state from Pittsburgh, I said, what is the chief question you get asked by motorists coming into the state? And they're asked, where is the New River Gorge Bridge? So this bridge is certainly marvelous engineering and spans a canyon in an exceedingly beautiful forest area of the state. I think it's also important culturally to recognize that the state's difficult terrain had limited us so much, but this bridge in the late 1970s had spanned a canyon that created a new transportation and travel route through a very rugged area of the state, and cutting time in crossing through that canyon formerly by a winding road. You're now able to cross it within 1 minute, whereas it took an hour to cross that canyon before. So
an hour and a lot of fear.
And a lot of fear. It was a horribly curved road. Yeah. And now the National Park Service maintains the road and has added wayside parking areas along the side, along the way. But at the time when we were young, if you remember, it was a dizzying road and frightening to come across traffic oncoming, at the same time, and have to pull over to make room to. So, but that is part of the aspect of the modern West Virginia. And I know these things happen in other places, but it's important here that modern transportation allowed the penetration of these mountains finally.
And there's a big international event at that bridge every year where people, on one day of the year, that people can jump off of the bridge, skydiving, bungee diving. So it brings a lot of tourists to the state.
Oh, it does. It does. Yeah, Bridge Day and the third weekend in October generally.
Yeah. So Maria just asked, can you recommend any cultural events, festivals in West Virginia? You should go to Bridge Day in October. You can walk across the bridge, see people jump off the bridge, hopefully live. And it's just a fantastic experience. What else? What other festivals?
Well, I think the state fair is traditional in any state, and it's agricultural. It's and again, almost I assume all states in the United States have a state fair every year. There's a festival that's become popular. It's called the Mothman Festival, and it's the lore of a creature who that was sighted here, potentially from outer space, according to the lore, that came to be here along the Ohio River in that section of West Virginia, in western West Virginia. And that has become a popular culture destination I think also in October, earlier in October, which is our chief fair season. If you want to come for fairs in West Virginia, September and October are good months for that.
Another question. Who are the best known West Virginians besides you, of course?
Yes. I'm going to speculate that it was a comedic actor named Don Knotts who created the character of a bumbling, inefficient, well-meaning most of the time deputy sheriff in a 1960s sitcom. And that situation comedy on television really captured the spirit of America in what seemed to be a simpler time. And it was a genius. He would create. He became this other person. But I don't know that he was the most influential West Virginian. He was certainly, I believe, the best known. Michael, do you have any other?
No, I would say Don Knotts is at the top. He was very famous into the 80s, just hugely popular and hilarious actor. There are a lot of other figures that have made contributions to science. or to travel. And Chuck Yeager, McBride. There are a lot of within the space industry. We've had some famous people, but I mean, that's one of the things about West Virginia. Not a lot of people are from West Virginia. It's a small state, and there aren't a lot of claims to fame.
Right. And there are many people, and that's just the nature of being in an area with a very low population. Is we have most of the time the same advantages of anyone else in the United States, but there's so few of us, generally speaking. We don't have these big cities, so we're not producing as many people. But all of those are certainly people that I would count among them, or among the best known.
What has changed since in your understanding, or the United States understanding of Appalachian culture? What has changed since when you were studying it in college and now? Because there's a lot more attention, a lot more appreciation of Appalachian culture. And there's a lot more, perhaps, political power of the people in this region of the country. How has the understanding of Appalachian culture changed over the years?
Well, it's been a complete reversal. Up until recently, I would say within the last 5 to 10 years, the Appalachian culture and West Virginia culture within it was associated often with poverty. And sometimes we had in the late 1800s, a world famous fight between two families in the mountains here, called the Hatfields and the McCoys. And that legend, which was popularized in the national press, I think put in people's minds that there was a violence that was inherent in these mountains, and to some extent they're slightly so, but it was a matter of people policing. A legal system wasn't necessarily strong, and so people had to took it on themselves to police themselves, and often without law and without attentiveness to those things, it creates anarchy, and that anarchy set up a situation in which a lot of people just took the law into their own hands. So, but I would say that in recent years, that those ideas among many Americans, popularly of lawlessness and poverty, have given way to ideas of beauty and authenticity. Michael and I we grew up, I think, in an era in which when you heard the words Appalachia, you did associate it with this poverty and lawlessness and extractive coal industry. And I had a young lady working for me. She's going into her 30s now. And I had asked her some years ago, I said, when you hear the word Appalachia, what do you think of? And she said, waterfalls and the Appalachian Trail, which is a famous hiking trail here that spans the Appalachian Mountains along much of the eastern states. And I said, you don't think of poverty at all or backwardness? And she said, no. So there has been a change in popular culture where people begin to think of this state and the Appalachian region in a positive way. And that's playing out wonderfully in West Virginia now, because so many people are moving here and investing here because they want the beauty and the authenticity, and this interaction with people who will look them into the eye and jest with them. Here, you don't. Instead of complimenting people here to get along with them, it's better if you pick on them, make fun of them. That's just a wonderful thing about being here, is there's this commonality of existence that a comedian called Red Green, who has had popularized the term "we're all in this together," and I think that I feel like that of all mankind, that we are all in this together. But certainly here in Appalachia, there's this, I have a feeling, if it's not necessarily put that way, that we're all on the same ride. and that's, so I think that many people are beginning, now that they can, because of Starlink and the communications technology, they're opting to move to West Virginia. So it's been a revolution. It's a complete turnaround. The accents here, though my accent is much more Pennsylvanian, because my people are from a different state. It's not now. People from West Virginia can hear my funny accent and they associate it with not from here. But my friends and family from Pennsylvania can certainly hear the bits of the accent, which I've had to somewhat adapt to get along here. But also at the same time, it's so cool to know these older words and Appalachian words and be able to pronounce things more like in this way. And if you don't, and people here in this particular area, instead of saying, hello, which might be a way I might say, a salutation to the average person around, it's a. And instead of saying oil, like the petroleum product, but there's oil on the road, it's slick. It's all. There's oil on the road. It's real slick outside. Mm-hmm. So that kind of speech it's wonderful.
Yeah. When I was in college, my Russian professor in my first year would laugh at my West Virginia / bad Russian accent. I was the only one in the class that had whatever Russian accent that was at the time, but it didn't serve me well in that class. And over time, I lost it. But my dad kept it alive, and my friends from school would actually call home just to listen to my dad talk, because it was such a unique accent and a whole unique vocabulary. And I still use a lot of those phrases, and I'm thankful I know them. What's happening with preservation? Because I know that's also something you're very interested in. And West Virginia has a lot of old historic structures. And there's always been, in my memory, an effort to try to save these places. But because there's not a lot of economic development, it's a real challenge. And I know that you are very involved in helping preserve old structures, old towns. What's the state of that? And how is West Virginia making that happen, or not?
It's a continuous challenge. And I think that I'm having the best success. I sit on the board of the Preservation Alliance of West Virginia, an organization of professionals, architects, developers, contractors, who are working to advocating that instead of building new structures, we often look at rehabilitating these older structures. One of the reasons is that they're built seemingly, arguably they're built better, but they're also, many of them were built in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And they were built by artisans and craftsmen who were available, particularly before the United States had created an income tax. So there was a lot more available money. That's one of the reasons that these fantastical old structures aren't created anymore. Mm-hmm. Also, there's a lot of construction at the time that used wood from trees that were hundreds of years old rather than 50 years old. Many of the trees that are used in construction now are just not, they're not old. When they were harvested. And so the wood is more, not as apt to be as long lived. But that's a compartment of the larger picture. But the larger picture is the society here, civilization here created things that it would be, in my opinion, best to save and build on. A lot of this comes back to the authenticity. What is the authenticity of the experience of being in any place in the world? If I went to Vladivostok and saw the same things that I would see here in America, in Ohio, say, I would be sheerly disappointed, because that's not the reason that I would have gone there. So there are so many reasons for preserving what a culture has created. And I think, excuse me, worldwide, people desire to understand different places. It all comes back to exploration. It's perhaps difficult to explain an environment that is the same as all other environments. It's just not as, it's not as entertaining.
Yeah, no, it's not as authentic.
Mm.
David, thank you so much for talking to us today. I hope everyone who heard this gets a chance to go to West Virginia and see the natural beauty and meet the people. It's a wonderful place. And thanks for all you do to tell us about it.
You're very, 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 very welcome.
Great to see you. Thanks again.
You're welcome. See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.